Okay, today we shall be finishing our consideration of the church in Western Europe in the early Middle Ages. Whenever it was that the last time we met, seems like a long time ago, we kind of thought of the background to this. We looked a little bit at the origins of Christianity, what it may not be, and so on, though, as I said at the time, that's not so important for us in this course. It's what people believe it to be is the key, obviously. And then we looked at the early development of Christianity and then the impact especially of Constantine's conversion and the gradual integration of Christianity, or quite quick in some respects, integration of Christianity with the Roman Empire, which is obviously very, very important in the history of that religion. And we looked at some of the effects that had on theology and organization and so on. Now, today we've got three things to do. We would have had two presentations. Elif is waiting in the wings, as we say, to tell us about monasticism. And we were going to have a second presentation, or it would have been the first one possibly, on the papacy. So at some point, maybe after Elif's presentation, I can say a little bit about the early history of the papacy. I won't go into too much detail. And then after a break, after the break, we've got the text of the Rule of St. Benedict, which I put on the link on Moodle, and which I hope everyone has read, printed out and read, and is ready to pass some comments and thoughts on. And yeah, maybe I should do the kind of thing my wife does, which is to check, for example, that everyone's brought the text with them in some form or other, or if you've got a laptop with it on there and things like that, because obviously you can't come and discuss something if you don't actually have it with you. I should perhaps start to be a little bit stricter about these things. Anyway, and that's quite an interesting document. I want us to think about the sort of general nature of the document, but also to look at the specifics of what it tells us and maybe doesn't tell us about the life of monks and the nature of monasticism in the early Middle Ages. But to alleviate Elif's excitement, I shall let her come on first and give the presentation about monasticism, which I'm sure you're all very eager to hear. Pens here if you need to write anything down. Okay, very, very quickly, I'll just say a few things about the early history of the papacy, but I'll maximum 10 minutes, because I want us, I see time is already moving on, I want us to spend a little bit of time considering the Rule of St. Benedict, of which we've heard a little bit already from Elif's presentation. And I think some of the points that we're going to say now we probably mentioned in our last class anyway, but I'll mention them again in the correct context. What is the formal title of the Pope, Papa? What is his correct title? Is that okay?
Bishop of Rome.
Bishop of Rome, okay. So in a most technical sense, he is one of many bishops who have, therefore, an authority over their diocese, which in this case is that of Rome. However, because of various physical, I suppose we could say, geographical, theological to some extent, and practical reasons, during the very early years, decades after the time of Constantine's conversion, we see the gradual emergence of the Bishop of Rome as claiming a certain authority over the other churches and other bishops, perhaps we should put it like that. Okay, so it's various factors. Allegedly, in Christian tradition, the first ever Bishop of Rome was Saint Peter. Originally called Simon. We'll come back to him in a minute. So one of the apostles, one of Jesus's followers, was supposedly the first ever sort of Christian leader in Rome. And so that's firstly very, very important. I also mentioned that I found the specific passage in the Gospel of Matthew here, mentioned last time again, okay, during a discussion between Peter and Jesus. Jesus then at one point says, and I tell you that you are Peter, okay, Petros. Petros meaning rock or stone, okay, and on this rock, so there's a word play there, of course, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades, of hell, will not overcome it. And this Petrine text has been used, or was used at the time, as another way of saying not just that he was literally Bishop of Rome, but that he was the most important of the apostles, that Jesus is renaming him the Rock and saying your name is Rock, and on that rock, on that foundation, the church will stand. And that's clearly saying he is, Simon Peter is in this sense very, very important. And therefore, like we were saying about hagiography later on, the Church of Rome is claiming if Peter was the most important and he was the first Bishop of Rome, therefore, ergo, the Church of Rome is the most important one. Okay, the same way as I said that saints' lives were saying things about their own saints in order to justify their claims and so forth. So that's one other reason. And obviously being Rome, being the old capital of the Roman Empire, okay, the Western emperors were in Ravenna and elsewhere by this point to a large extent, and we have Constantinople as well, but Rome still was a special place, and so it's special in a historical and political sense, so it's now assuming a kind of religious speciality as well. So during the kind of 100 years or so after the conversion of Constantine, and as I said before, we don't have a linear history, we don't just have the gradual spread of Christianity after that time, but gradually during that period, for various reasons, we see the Bishop of Rome claiming sometimes more effectively than other times to have a special status in theory, and sometimes therefore trying to use that status to have a more authority over the other bishops and other parts of the Western Church especially. For example, there were cases where different bishops might be arguing, and then the Bishop of Rome said, oh, well, I'll be the mediator, I'll sort it all out for you, and you'll come to me. And in a sense, he's being not necessarily a purely objective mediator, but he's using that as a chance to impose his decision. So I'll favour the Church of Jeren over Elif, and by doing that, I'm not so concerned about you two, but I'm concerned about showing that I have the authority to make that decision. So there's that kind of thing was going on as well. And the emperors also had some interest in Rome, obviously, and in the Bishop of Rome as an important churchman for themselves. So in the early years, the status was given to them as well. So it was a gradual thing. There's no point where you can suddenly say, suddenly the Bishop of Rome becomes the Pope, sort of super bishop or something like that. It was a gradual thing going on during the 50 to 100 years after that point for various reasons. A few guys worth mentioning who were important in these developments. Pope Leo I, and I have his dates here as Pope, obviously. He was particularly concerned, I think, with this Petrine tradition, the on this rock I will build the church, and he tried to stress that the popes were literally, legally, the heirs to St. Peter. So he tried to make a very strong connection in that way. He was one of the ones that enforced that. And Elif already mentioned Gregory I, sometimes called the Great, and I don't remember his dates, but I got them here a little bit later on. He was, in fact, I think, scholar and maybe a monk. He wasn't really eager to become pope, but it was kind of thrust upon him. But once he did become pope, he was very, very important in a whole host of ways. He was a great organizer. He was largely responsible for reorganizing the church on a number of levels, particularly the papacy, obviously. He wrote a number of important works as well, theological and his pastoral care in terms of organizing yourself and so on. And I think, as Elif said, he was responsible for sending out the first formal mission to what was then England, the Anglo-Saxons, and then beginning Christianity amongst the Anglo-Saxons. Oh, and there's a little story here, which is probably not entirely true, but the story goes that Pope Gregory was walking through the streets of, presumably of Rome, and saw a small gang of, a group of little small children, blonde-haired little boys with blue eyes. And obviously being from Italy, they all, like Mediterranean people, they all had dark hair and dark eyes, so these boys stood out. And a bit like the Turks today, who often when my children were small, used to come fustuk and all that, the blonde hair and things like this. He must have gone and said whatever he said, fustuk or something, and he said, oh, look at these beautiful children, they're like angels. Okay. Angeli, angels. And whoever was with him said, no, maybe they were slaves or something, I don't know what it was, I think slaves. He said, no, non-Angeli said Angli, not angels, but English. He said, so that's very, I mean, it's too good to be true, as they would say. But then he said, of course, but okay, well, where do they live then? And they explained they lived in Britain now and so on. And he said, are they part of the church? And they said, no, they're all pagans. They haven't been Christianized. So then he said, this is terrible. And so then he launched his mission, sent the other Augustine up to Canterbury and so on, and the rest is history, as we say. But whether that's true or not, but again, another contribution from Gregory to the history of the church and to some extent monasticism there. But obviously, again, controlling and setting up and converting is controlled by the Pope there. So he's taking on assuming the authority to bring people into the church. It's not something that is done in a disorganized way. He's assuming that's his responsibility and things. And of course, by his time, things had moved along quite a lot as well. So we've got these two different sort of sides, which, as we said before, you get in most religions, the kind of formal hierarchy versus the kind of less formal, more spiritual, ascetic traditions or whatever. Here we have the formal hierarchy organized ultimately in the West, of course, you get the Pope becoming the head of that. And then parallel to that, to some extent, you have the ascetic tradition, which we've been hearing about from Elif's presentation as well. And there are overlaps and connections, as we saw here, and often they're often following rather different lines as well. Okay, so that's my kind of 10 minutes on the papacy done very quickly. So now, can you get out your texts of the Rule of Saint Benedict? Now, I've got an older photocopy, and it's more or less the same translation with one or two differences. So I'm going to refer to my photocopy here. Hands up if you have the text with you. Yes. Sorry? Have it. If you can see it, whether if you've got wireless internet access or something on your laptop. I mean, I've saved the Amazon rainforest. You don't have to print out so much or whatever. Please, well, please do read the texts I give you. You may not understand everything in them, but do try and read them. It is one of the formal criteria for evaluating. And obviously, please do bring the text with you, because you can't retain 5, 6, 10 pages in your head, I don't suppose, unless you've got much better brains than me, which might be possible. So bringing the text is obviously important as well, because you'll write notes and obviously you'll be wanting to refer to those in the discussion. Okay, the Rule of St. Benedict. Broadly, how can we classify this document? What kind of a text is it? Narrative, administrative? I mean, what kind of a document is this?
Instruction.
Instruction, yes. More. We call it in Latin, obviously, regulus, which gives us the English word rule. Another word for a rule?
Regulations. Regulations.
Okay, well, yeah, we're etymologically in the same words there. Law is another one, okay. Rules, laws, and things like that. And these documents, of which there are many, of course, from the past, rules or laws, regulations, what are they doing? What are they seeking to do in a general sense? Not specifically here, but if we're looking at a law from the ancient Near East, or a religious set of rules from the Middle Ages, or a statute from the early modern period. They're all rules, they're all laws. What are they trying to do?
Establishing one central permanent system of...
Okay.
Yeah, you can...
Yeah, no, I don't know sign language. I'm not... Yeah, okay, organised. I mean, government in some cases, in other cases it's a looser definition of governing. Okay, yes, in creating some kind of institution. On the one hand, it's kind of bit of... Jim, you want to...
Can we say to describe the possible and expected features and duties of the members?
All right, let's put these words down. Expected. Okay. And something up here, whether it's government, we said institution, person, it can be one person or whatever. Firstly, it's the communication of certain requirements, possible, expected ways to behave in one form or another, from the lawmaker, which may be an institution or an individual person, whatever, to some defined community, whether it's a bunch of monks living in a monastery or whether it's a whole nation or something like that, okay? And what we've got is kind of here. We assume it tells us a little bit about this person, okay? And their ideas, and we assume it tells us a little bit about the behavior, in a sense. Now, this is the example I always use on these occasions, and again, apologies if any of you have heard it before. If I decided that from now on, everyone in this class must wear a hat when they come to my class for the 3 or 4 hours a week, that's the new law. The rule of David is hat wearing, okay? And you have to wear your hat for the whole 3 hours that you're with me in the week. And I wrote that down. I put it on Moodle or printed it out or something. And then in 500 years' time, someone discovers this thing and says, oh, look, what's this? The rule of David. Everyone must wear a hat, blah, blah, blah. Now, you're all sensible people. Some of you may not even own a hat. I don't own a hat, actually, thinking about it. I have hoods from my coat, but I don't actually own a hat formally to put on my head or whatever. And probably most of you would think, I'm not going to do that. And you wouldn't wear your hat, okay? And I'm not a particularly authoritarian person. I wouldn't be imposing and forcing you to do it. So, no one can come and see what we're doing here, but the person has got this document from later on, okay? Now, he or she, the future historian, doesn't necessarily know that this bit didn't work, okay? They can't write a history of education in 21st century Turkey and say, and they had to wear hats all the time, and they were always wearing hats in class, because that connection there isn't necessary. It's expected or required, but it may not be fulfilled. Okay, so what I'm getting at is, to what extent do laws, regulations, rules, whatever, tell us about how people behaved or not? It may tell us about how people behave. In other cases, it may not. It tells us more about the crazy teacher who said you've got to wear hats, but you didn't wear a hat. Many laws are created to solve a problem. We have, in all sensible countries in the world, we have laws about murder, for example, and punishment for murdering someone. Now, you don't create a law about murder unless you actually have the fact that murder exists. So does a law say there was no murder because they've got laws about it, or does it say there was murder going on because they've had to make a law to stop it? Okay. Now, we don't have a law in Turkey or anywhere which says, I don't know, people should not go around walking on their heads, because that's not the thing that we do. We don't do that, and you don't need to make a law to stop us doing something stupid or whatever, okay? That's not a very good example, but you see what I'm saying. So again, the question is, does the law tell us what was actually expected, or does it tell us the behavior which is being reacted against in the law, in a sense? So when we read a law, does it tell us about what was done in the society? Does it tell us just about the crazy ideas of the lawmaker and what he or she wanted? Or does it tell us about the society, because we have to turn the medallion round and say, laws about murder mean there was murder rather than that there wasn't murder in that sense. Does that make sense? Yes? So, with that in mind, let us turn to the rule of St. Benedict. Structure. Does it have a structure, or is it just a sequence of decisions here and there and so on? Or does it have some structure which, like a good essay, a good law tract, has related topics going together? Are there any idea of a structure here which suggests that the author of this, Benedict of Nursia, was kind of thinking about what he was doing as he was writing it down? Jim?
Maybe not like an essay, but we can say he firstly introduced how animals should behave and should be like, and then he explains the duties and features of the monks, so we can follow the order.
Yeah, there is pretty much some kind of a structure. It has, well, they got here. I don't suppose it says prologue in the original manuscripts, and we've got these numberings here. These are what modern editors have put in. But it begins by defining monasticism and looking at the different kinds, the good kinds of monks and the bad kinds of monks, and so on, and saying, I prefer one tradition and things like that. And then I think it goes through a sequence of points. I've scribbled them down here to remind myself, but. There is a sense of focusing on organisation first, of the hierarchy with the abbot and so on, and the stress on obedience is very important, I think. And then we go through points where we look at the kind of religious aspects of their life. We also look at the physical aspects of their life, and then we finish off, I think, towards the end with kind of practical things like how do you join and how do we ordain the abbot and so on. So there is some kind of a structure there which clearly tells us a little bit about the author in that sense or whatever. We won't necessarily spend time looking at the different kinds of monks and so on, though that's very interesting. We've covered some of that before in Elif's presentation and things like this. So let's move on to some of the later, the subsequent points, the main points here. What the abbot should be like. What's the purpose of what do we get the impression here of this? And what does the word Abba, where does the word Abba come from? Sorry? Father, Abba, like Baba, let's move the letters around or whatever. Obviously, ultimately the same kind of baby word or whatever. It's like the English word dad is probably kind of really related to dede in Turkish. It's just another word for an older man in that sense, but we've ended up having the dede one for dad, and in other traditions, Abba, Baba, Pop are all the same word for father in that sense. And I think Abba probably Syriac tradition or whatever in that sense as well. So it's the father. So the idea here is that the abbot is not just the leader, but has a fatherly kind of a role, perhaps within the community in that sense. What do we learn about the abbot? What do we get from what the abbot should be like from this?
You should teach not only with words but deeds.
Okay, he should lead by example as well as by what he says in that sense. So he should be a very good monastic kind of person in that sense, yes?
He's kind of responsible for salvation of those under his care.
Yes, their passing of their souls to heaven and all that, their behaviour that leads to that is his responsibility. So he's not just telling them what to do, he's also should be like a father concerned for their well-being physically, but in this case spiritually as well.
We should treat the monks equally.
Yeah, that's quite an important point, I think, here. Everyone under his care should be treated equally. That comes out at a few points there, okay? A freeborn man shall not be preferred to one coming from servitude, okay? So whatever the background, social background of even the legal status of the people entering the community, once they're in the community, they're all equal in the eyes of God, and therefore, in a sense, in the eyes of the the abbot as well. Then we get these grades of humility coming up, 5 and 7. We're missing a few out here, concerning obedience, concerning humility, and so on. What do we get from this in terms of the monks then? So we're down to the members of the community. We looked very briefly at the abbot. The first grade of humility is obedience without delay. What does that mean? Obedience. Almost. Keep going.
Just not having any trouble or any question about any given order that is stated by the religion.
Yeah, or in this case, perhaps by your abbot as well. What you're told to do, you do it. You don't question it. You obey what you're told to do. And it's interesting, this is the first of these grades of humility, these kind of personal rules of behavior, in a sense. It seems to be very, very important. Ravel, you want to?
That's the kind of line that I would expect to find in the military handbook. Obedience without delay.
Yes.
You obey your commanding officer instantly without any concern. Immediately go.
Yeah, okay. I mean, in a military kind of a context, you need to do that. Otherwise, the whole thing falls apart. Now, here, it's more to do with, I think, the assumption that the abbot is the father. He's kind of representing God in a sort of sense over the community, and therefore you have to obey him, because ultimately you're obeying not just the person but sort of God in the wider sense and things like that. But it's interesting, the comparison. That's quite telling there. Okay, in my version I've next got number 7, which is the 6th grade of humility. That a monk be contented with all lowliness and extremity, and consider himself with regard to everything that is enjoined on him as a poor and unworthy workman, blah, blah, blah. And then we have some quotation there, okay? And the 7th grade a little bit later on, okay, that he, with his tongue, pronounced himself viler and more worthless than all. So he considered himself to be lowly, down, but also he's willing to admit that. He's willing to say that to other people. What's the reason for this? Well, it seems a bit nasty, right, isn't it? I mean, what's the purpose of forcing yourself to be poor and unworthy and lowly in this sense? What are they trying to do?
So as to eliminate any feeling of superiority, probably, towards anyone else, because you really consider yourself unworthy, so not worthy than anybody, not worthier.
Yes, you're going to be treated equally by the abbot, but you have to consider yourself even lower than your colleagues, in a sense. You have to try and put yourself down. Okay, Alp, this time?
I think it's because they need to, they should never forget that they should never forget origin of sin, that man is fallen.
Right, okay, yes, we're living in the post-Lapsarian era. Humanity has fallen thanks to Adam and Eve, so the monks are assuming the blame for that, in a sense, and recognizing that in a broader sense as well. And if you do have a very negative view of yourself, for whatever reason, then you are obviously going to obey and do the other things as well. Serkan?
Like Jesus as much as they can.
Okay, many of these things were elements that seem to be characteristic of Jesus and aspect, or the way he's interpreted in the Bible as well. That's important. Fatih?
Just to prevent further distractions. If there is an obstacle between you and your holy beliefs and other stuff, this cannot be counted as a pure belief. So other material like foods and other stuff, and the word that you count on yourself, these can be an obstacle between.
Right, yeah, to your salvation ultimately, as we said before, in that sense. So yes, if you're giving importance, to use the Turkish phrase, to certain aspects of your life, whatever that might be. In this case, your opinion of yourself, there is a danger that you're not focusing on the right way in that sense as well. So this is interesting because these are not kind of formal rules that you can kind of impose and control, like wearing hats or something, or what food you eat, or whatever it might be. But these are sort of attitudinal things. You're saying this is the attitude you must have and you must seek to have. So they're more of a theoretical or personal underpinning for the success otherwise of the rule in itself. And then we move on to various more practical, more literal and physical aspects of the life. Okay, religious life in the monastery I've got here next written down. Concerning the divine offices at night, which Elif mentioned a little bit about that. Okay, I mean, their job obviously is to pray individually and communally on a regular basis. Okay, how many psalms are to be said and things like that. So he is regulating, he is clearly imposing this is what you must be doing on a daily basis. So that's quite important, nighttime and daytime and so on.
I have a question.
Yep.
Is there any specific reasons for this night prayings? I'm just drawing parallels with Russian Orthodox monks, and what they have, what they call all-night prayer. It starts with the sunset, and they pray all night long, and they finish in the morning with the sunrise, followed by a special prayer, and it represents like conviction, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And in the church, they kind of follow the same path, but they shrink it to 3-hour prayer in the evening and special prayer in the morning. So I'm just drawing parallels. Is there any...
Right. I'm not know the exact answer to that question. It's a good question. I mean, on the one hand, you could say, well, they're supposed to spend a large part of the day praying, whether it's during the daytime or at night time. So they pray in the day, they're not allowed to sleep for too long at night either. So on the one hand, it might just be that side of things. You're saying, is there anything particular about the night? What's the concern with the night and so on? I don't actually know the answer to that, whether there is an answer to that question, or if anyone's got any ideas, or whether it's not just 24/7 praying in a sense, or whether there's something to do with the night and obviously the coming of the dawn or something like that. I don't know the answer to that. It's a good question, but possibly different interpretations or explanations at different times for that one. But and then we get some stuff about their physical life, so it's less to do with their religious life and the praying side, which is obviously their main duty, their main job, but their physical life as well. What does it say about sleeping? What do we got here about the sleeping arrangements for the monks?
They're not supposed to sleep nude.
Sorry?
They cannot sleep in the nude. They have to have clothing.
Right. Does that where does it say?
Protect the friars.
They shall sleep clothed.
It says they shall sleep separately in separate beds. I mean, I don't particularly want to be sleeping with a bunch of monks myself anyway, so interesting thing. What the reason for that is, I'm not sure. They shall receive positions for their beds after the manner of their characters, according to the dispensation of their abbots. So he even controls kind of how and where they get to sleep. They should all sleep in one place, if possible, if they've got a big enough room, big enough dormitory, I suppose, is how it would be.
Younger brothers shall not have beds by themselves.
Right, okay, younger ones, maybe a few too many hormones going around or something. I don't want them to be whatever, or chatting away and things like this. They shall sleep clothed and girt their belts or with their ropes, and they shall not have their knives at their side. Well, that's a good idea. Roll over and cut yourself or something. But yeah, okay. Specifically says you've got to, to be clothed and so on specifically. But they should always be alert, and when the signal is given, raise without delay. Okay, as what Elif was saying, be ready to rise for prayer and things like that. Okay, the cellarer, okay, who has a job to look after the physical side of people and so on. Number 33, whether the monks should have anything of their own. What does it say here? Oh, yeah, go on.
About the cellarer. I mean, is this a person chosen from among the monks? It's not, is it, or is it? Because it says, shall be elected from the congregation, who is wise, mature in character. So the congregation...
There it means the monks, the community, not the idea of the sort of, I am the priest and you're the congregation there.
People living in the area
No, it doesn't. I'm fairly certain this is among the community. It's one of the monks who, for whatever reason, is deemed to be able to fulfill those various duties. It's a job, yeah. I mean, I don't know exactly how many jobs we can find from the rule of St. Benedict, but by the later Middle Ages, half the members of a religious community had a particular job as cellarer, as sacristan, and all these other things. So there were lots of jobs that they did. Someone was the cook, and blah, 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 and so on. And cellarer is obviously one of these very early ones that we get mentioned here. Okay, number 33, whether the monks should have anything of their own. What's the point of this?
They shouldn't own something.
Yes, he should have absolutely not anything. Okay, neither a book, nor tablets, nor a pen, nothing at all. Okay, you're really making the point here with all these nothings and nots and so on. Why? Yeah, okay. There's the attachment to things, possessions, which then splitting your concern to the material world and so on.
It says it is not allowed to the monks to have their own bodies or wills in their own power. I find this extremely disturbing, and I think this is no. I'm serious. It might come off as funny, but this is sick. It's very unhealthy. And I hope this hat example comes into play here. It's written here, but I hope that they did not practice it.
Well, it depends what you mean by by the body here. I mean, they've already emphasized things like lowliness and especially obedience. That was the first grade of humility. So what they're really meaning is that, if I decide that Oksana has to go over there or over here, she's got to do it. She can't say, no, I think that's unreasonable. I don't want to do that. Okay, I want to control what my body does in that sense. It's physically as well as mentally what you're doing, you should obey in that sense. So you can't even claim ultimately, well, there are some natural rights or whatever which I have, imprescriptible rights and all these other things which we get later on, and you can't take that away from. You've got absolutely no right, whether of physical possessions or deciding what you do. The abbot will tell you what to do. I'm sure on a day-to-day basis it wasn't quite so totalitarian or whatever, but in certain circumstances you can't argue back and say, no, I don't want to do that or something. But yeah, I mean, it's extreme. It's extreme.
What I have in mind is I think that this might be taking it to a wrong direction, something we probably don't want to talk about, but I think in the essence of this is not faith. This is easy. Obedience is easy. Faith is strengthened when you have contradictions. Okay. Well, it's not. This is denial for denial's sake. Okay. It's not denying your will, your body for this because.
Yeah, I see where you're going. Yeah, I see it should come from within rather than just doing what you're told to do in a sense. But then you can still have that kind of faith and be a good Christian, but you wouldn't be joining that religious community. People who do that must be doing it for particular reasons. They have other ways of expressing their faith. You can still be a faithful Christian, but you wouldn't join that community. Now, okay, all sorts of hands coming up here, and we've only got 5 minutes to go. We're not finishing early, as I said. Elif was putting her hand up a little bit earlier, but I'll go round everyone.
You shouldn't take every word literally with it always meant by don't possess your body. I mean, it has apparently have more spiritual and metaphorical meaning in it.
Well, it's all meant to go to your attitude, I suppose, or whatever, which is also what faith is, because it's a form of attitude. So, yes, it's very interesting. Now, the other guy, Ravel, then we'll go to Murat, and then Ecem.
I think the reason that it's so specific about every single little aspect being controlled and giving up absolutely everything is it's all connected. If you can get in the mindset of giving up your body, giving up every possession, being a willless subject, it's a lot easier to kind of to surrender yourself to that faithful attitude, to be a vessel of Christ and to let Christ flow through you. It's about the destruction of the flesh and all of your individual desires.
Yeah, and your identity there, is gone. Yeah.
Each of those little tiny points is essential to that, because if you can create this entire atmosphere, this entire cohesive, internally coherent system, then it helps you to live in that way, and it makes it a reality in a way.
Yeah, a good point. Murat,
I
quick.
think also that, I mean, by giving all about the body or wills, it's about maximizing your time, energy, your every element of your existence towards actually just thinking about God in this regard. I mean, and later on, of course, it's mentioned that, you know, they are restricted with the amount of food they can have, and because, I mean, they want you not to think much about food. I mean, instead of that, just waiting for the supper time, instead of that, you concentrate yourself totally on your prayer of God, whatever.
Yeah, and you're not thinking, ooh, what's for dinner tonight, or something like that, or whatever. You know what it is, and yeah.
Just to sever that
Yeah,
attachment
yes.
to, I think, anything material. That's the point.
And lastly, Ejim, you want?
I want to say something about having no body or will. Yes, it seems sick and irrational, but there are also some psychological treatments about this disidentification therapy, which means you are in your body without your body. You suppose that you are not in your body, so you cannot limit yourself with your body and your soul. So
what you can achieve is more, you're saying, or something?
I think there is a kind of lack of explanation in this article, but when we look at first, it seems not logical, but when you think deeply, it seems
Yeah, okay, so you're bringing modern psychological theory to play on this one. Okay, non-monastic Alp, you can come back to all these. I see he's not going to become a Benedictine monk in the foreseeable future, but...
I think what I have, I don't really care what people do with their lives. I mean, they can believe whatever they want to believe in, but maybe this is what I had in mind, and because I got a bit excited to fail to express it, which is, in some time, that the only institution that is around in Europe will be monasteries that preserves culture and books and so on and so forth, right? And because I had something on 12th century Renaissance in a previous course, most of the stuff that Europe preserves from ancient Rome and ancient Greece before kind of Islam spread comes from monasteries. They keep these, they keep them on manuscripts, they keep on writing them. But what worries me tremendously is this is their attitude, and what survived, thanks to them, and I mean it, thank you, these people, have been chosen with this attitude. And because of them, we have lost some stuff. And that's why I get frustrated in England. I don't really care if they lead an ascetic life, even though I think it is sick. They would probably think my opinion is the way I live my life is. That's fine. But they're responsible for something good, and at the same time they're kind of responsible for something that's not so good. And that's because of this, which frustrates.
Yeah, I might object to the use of the word good there, because obviously that's, as we said before, a kind of value judgment. I mean, maybe it's not a good thing that Roman culture has been preserved for us by whoever, I don't know. I mean, but we're not in the business of that kind of thing. But I can see what you're saying. Yeah, it's interesting that on the one hand, things which, if we think of it in a certain way, we would see as positive contributions, and it is the successors of St. Benedict, not him necessarily and the guys at Monte Cassino themselves so much at that time, but later on the people who followed on have preserved Western culture to a large extent, and you're saying, but then if you look at those people in a little bit more detail, at least as it's presented here, but remember, as we said before, all of this, what really went on, as one of you also said, maybe not quite as extreme and as idealized as we have here. One last thing, because we are kind of going over time or whatever, and all sorts of other stuff we were going to look at, but number 40, concerning the amount of drink, it says here, Elif mentioned about their being permitted to drink wine. That sounds pretty good, actually. You drink a wine every day. They do say it's good for your heart to have a bit of glass of red wine or something. Why?
Because it's sacred.
Possibly Jesus was turning water into wine according to the Gospels and so on. To relax them? Well, yeah, well, that's it's not. Why have they got wine here? I mean, why are they being allowed to drink wine? do you think?
Out of Christ.
Encourage membership.
Right, okay. Well, but all these comments, though interesting and funny as they are, going against all the sort of ideological side we've been looking at, practically, in the past, water was not something advisable to drink. Okay, water was often, could be polluted, could be dangerous to drink and so on. Alcoholic drink of any sort that had been processed was actually safer to drink, obviously in smaller quantities. And so until quite recently, people drank wine or beer or something, not necessarily just to get drunk and have a great time and feel relaxed, but because drinking water was not necessarily safe. Okay, in England, we can turn the tap on. My children always get amazed. We can go into the room, we can turn the tap on, we can fill a cup of water, and we can drink it. But I never do that in Turkey, okay, or in France or elsewhere. It's not a good idea, even today, to drink unprocessed and unprepared water and things like that. So possibly part of the reason here is just practically it was the best thing to drink. Okay, look, time has gone. You're all wanting to go away for your Bayram. This is probably the last class you will have until you escape.